Hey everyone, I am Chris Riggs, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about fuel pumps. One of the most common questions I get is regarding fuel cut. So customers will do aftermarket fuel pumps, or they'll be on factory fuel pumps, and they will get like a hard cut. And they'll call me, and the car is on the side of the road, and they're like, I don't know what to do, but every time I give it gas or I go wide open throttle, I'm getting this really hard cut. I don't know what it means. Fuel pump, specifically filtration issues, are like the Achilles heel, especially for like the full bolt-on E85 GTR. You're running aftermarket pumps, and the big problem is there are no aftermarket filter options for the factory basket. So as these cars are now getting older and older and they've been run on gasoline, what happens is customers switch the cars to ethanol, and ethanol cleans the tank. So you put ethanol in the tank, and all the grime, gasoline is a very dirty fuel. So when you put ethanol in the tank, all that grime gets broken down, and where does it go? It goes to the filters. And the problem is there is no aftermarket filter option for the factory basket. I think that is a horrible thing. Nissan should have solved this problem a long time ago, because it's plagued the GTR platform since day one. And the higher mileage and the older these cars get, and the longer they've been run on gasoline, the nastier the filters are. So now you're taking, ethanol, which uses about 30% more fuel volume. In essence, it burns 30% faster. So you need about 30% more capacity for those fuel pumps. When you get these high mileage, really dirty pre-filters on the basket, and you put an aftermarket pump now reusing that same filter, because there is no aftermarket filter option, and you're trying to get 30% more flow through those filters, those pumps will start to cavitate. They get really, really hot, and they start to cavitate. They can't suck in. It's like trying to basically breathe through a straw. That's the best way I could describe it. You're trying to suck through a straw, and you're trying to suck this volume, this 30% more volume of fuel. And what happens is these pumps just start to get really hot. The brushes get burnt up inside the pump. Pumps begin to cavitate. The fuel volume is greatly diminished. And then under load, especially under wide open throttle, the car starts to lean out. The ECU sees that. Cobb and Ecutech have aftermarket fuel trim, fuel cuts. And basically when the short-term fuel trims, which is effectively short-term is what is happening in the near term, when the short-term fuel trims hit 120%, Cobb and Ecutech both, and it's tuner dependent. They can adjust that number, but most tuners will leave it at the default. But at about 120% fuel trims, what that means is that the ECU is commanding 20% more fuel to hit that fuel target. In other words, the car is leaning out. So the pumps have gotten hot, or there's some sort of filtration issue, and the car is leaning out under wide open throttle. And that's why you get a fuel cut, because the car is leaning out, and Cobb and Ecutech have fuel safeties in place so that you don't lean out your motor and blow it. Okay. So, when those pumps, those aftermarket pumps start to go bad, it's common for those pumps to short out. They also pull a lot of amperage. Your factory wiring has a 15 amp fuse. So you've got a 15 amp fuse for your primary pump, and you've got a 15 amp fuse for your secondary pump. And when those pumps start to go bad and they start to short out, they will start to pop that fuse. They'll pull more amperage and the fuse blows. So a lot of customers will call me and say, hey, I checked my fuel system. It was just a fuse. And it's like, it's never just a fuse. If the fuse is blown 99.9% of the time, the pump is bad, or it's going bad, and you can keep changing the fuses and you'll keep blowing the fuses. So you have two fuses. Your primary pump, customers will often call and they'll say, well, which fuel pump is it? Because this is happening under wide open throttle. When I drive around town, it's fine. If I'm at idle, if I'm at cruise on the highway, it's not an issue. But when I go wide open throttle, that's when I have the problem. The majority of the time, it's your secondary fuel pump. Your primary fuel pump runs all the time, and it's on a fuel pump control module that sees 8, 10, or 12 volt. Okay, it's a 3-speed controller from the factory. So if the car fires up, it's probably not your primary fuel pump. If it was your primary fuel pump, the car would never start. Odds are high it's going to be your secondary pump. Your primary pump, just so you know, if you ever get to the point where the car doesn't start, first thing you do is check your fuse. Why not? The primary fuse pump is in your engine bay, and it's in your battery box. There's a black case about 4 inches wide and 8 inches tall. And inside that black box is where your primary 15 amp blue fuse is. If that fuse is blown, change that fuse. And again, go look at the pump. The pump's probably shorted out and dead. If it's only happening under wide open throttle, the odds are extremely high. It's just your secondary pump. And your secondary pump, that fuse is in your kick panel underneath, down by basically where your brake pedal is. So it's on the left side, and check that fuse. It's also a 15 amp fuse. And you can look at your fuse box to tell you where the fuse is, but it's a 15 amp blue fuse. Check it and see if it's intact. If it is intact, then I would, you also have on the secondary pump, sorry, it's a little technical. It has a relay. So it's possible, and the relay is in the trunk. It's on the right side of the trunk. You'll have to pull back some carpeting to get to it. And it's possible that the relay has become defective, but I don't see that very often. Man, in 10 years, I've seen it maybe a half dozen times, or maybe less than that. Usually the secondary fuse will blow, but the problem is almost universally the same. People want to know, what's the culprit? What's causing this? 9 times out of 10, it's filtration. So those filters are disgusting, and you've reused them, and you've got 50, 60, 100,000 miles on your car, and you've got these filters that are just disgusting. And you can change them. People will say, it's the fuel pump. They get so upset, well, I bought X pump and the pump died. And it's like, well, you're going to kill every pump you put in there. I don't care what pump you put. If you keep using that filter, you're going to keep killing whatever brand of pump you put in there. You're going to burn them out, especially on the 85. So what is the solution to all of this? Well, the solution is an aftermarket basket. And there's a couple companies out there, Visconti, which is, in my opinion, the best basket on the market, period, end of story. That's really all you should be using. And then there is the Four Innovations basket. The Visconti basket is an OEM basically replacement drop-in. So it uses some of your OE components. It fits like the stock basket, which means that it's very simple to install. He has designed his basket to basically integrate with the factory plastic bottom lower. So it snaps together, and it has aftermarket filters. And that's a really beautiful thing, because those filters are only a couple of dollars a piece. So once a year or every other year, you can go in, you can pull the basket out for good measure as a maintenance thing, especially on ethanol as a maintenance item, pull the filters out, and for literally a couple dollars a piece, you can change those pre-filters. He also has a serviceable post filter, which I doubt really you'll probably ever need to change. But if you did, you can service it, because your factory basket, the post filter is enshrouded in a hard plastic casing. It cannot be serviced. If you open it up, you've destroyed your basket. You're going to replace your basket. So I'm a big fan of the Visconti basket. And I tell customers, especially with these cars getting older now, we're dealing with cars that are now pushed. 09, been out since 08. So you're talking 12-year-old car. There's lots of cars out there that are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. And this is basically expected. This should not come as a surprise. If you are buying an older, especially CBA GTR, and I would say even like a 2012, 2013, it's pretty common on now at this point. These cars are getting older. But if you're buying an older GTR, just budget for it. You might as well just put $1,500 aside and just factor that into the price of the car, because the odds are extremely high that if you mod the car further, or even if you hold on to the car, you're going to start to kill fuel pumps. And the only true fix, you can Band-Aid it. And I see so many, I get guys coming through the office all the time, and they'll say, well, just give me another fuel pump. I can put a fuel pump in it for, one pump in there for $130. And I'm like, that's fine, but it's not going to last very long. And you're going to be back here again for another one. So if you want to keep doing that, if your time is not worth much and you want to keep going into the fuel basket, that's fine. Go into the fuel basket. But if you want a one and done it, if you want something that is going to solve the problem, you really need to be on a high flow filter, an aftermarket filter, and an aftermarket basket. And for me, At this point, if I did another GTR today as my personal GTR, I would go straight to the Visconti basket. No questions asked. That's what I would do. I would do the Visconti basket. I would do the hardwire kit, just so I'm not running those pumps through the factory wiring. I don't want a chance burning up the fuel pump controller and things like that. So I would do his hardwire kit. It's $400, and then his shield, which is $60. So I think it's $1460 to $1560, something like that, depending upon what pump options you go with. But for roughly $1,500, you can pretty much once and done forever permanently solve the fuel pump issue that I hear about every single day. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't hear about this from some customer around the world that calls me with a help. I'm getting a fuel cut and I don't know what to do. And I will tell you that at least 90% of the time, it is the fuel pump. They may troubleshoot. They may say, "Oh, I dropped a filter. I put a fuse in, and now the pumps are working again. I made a wide open throttle pull, and everything's fine." But almost always, they'll call me back within a week, and they'll say, "Oh, it's doing it again, and the fuse is blown." And it's like, well, you never solved the problem. The problem is the fuel pump, and really the problem is the pre-filter. It all stems around Nissan's inability, lack of desire, I don't know, to sell to sell those filters. The only way to get a brand new filter for the factory basket is to buy a brand new basket from Nissan, which is ridiculous. And so your best bet in these higher mileage cars are really any GTR. I'm telling you, I cannot say it enough. If I'm building a GTR today, even full bolt-on E85 GTR, if I can afford it, I'm going to do an aftermarket basket with serviceable filters. I'm going to get rid of those filters, especially if the car has been run on gas, because the countdown starts. If that car has been run on gas and then you switch that car to E85 and you've never changed the filters out, the time starts. Like I can almost guarantee within 6 to 12 months, you're going to start to have fuel pump problems, like clockwork. And the best way to do it is from day one, put an aftermarket basket in there with a serviceable filter and be done with it and solve your cut problems. So if that's what's going on with your car, odds are high this is your solution. It's not a horrible expense, but I think it's a very justifiable expense if this is a car you want to drive often and you want to keep headache free.